The additions made by the Washington Commanders this year on the edge mean that the defensive end position does not have to be a priority in the NFL draft, but it does not eliminate one from being taken in the first 50 picks. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in, Commanders fans, to this episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And you can continue this conversation with me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders and sign up today. From there, you will get text messages directly from me, and you can send them directly to me. No hashtags, no apps, no filters. Literally just you and I conversing about news, analysis, one-on-one conversations, and bonus content dropping all the time. So again, become an insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to text me today. I'm David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderCountry.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers and everydayers. As always, I greatly appreciate you coming through for the program. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode, we are deep diving the current situation surrounding the Washington Commanders defensive end group, including one outside linebacker and how he may or may not fit in what's going on and what we think we know right now about what the future holds for the Washington Commanders. And we're going to start off by looking at the new additions, and we're going to start off by looking at the new depth chart. I'm going to tell you all how it all plays into what I think in the NFL draft means that the Washington Commanders won't have to prioritize the edge position, but certainly could still take at least one in the top 100, potentially one in the first 40 picks of the NFL draft, and their first 3 picks of the NFL draft. But first, let's start with the new additions. Defensive end Dorrance Armstrong coming over from the Dallas Cowboys. Defensive end Clelin Ferrel coming over from the San Francisco 49ers. Defensive end Dante Fowler coming over from the Cowboys. And defensive end Efe Obada, not a new addition, but a returning, the only defensive end re-signed to the roster this offseason by the Washington Commanders, joining current defensive ends that were holdovers from 2023, Jalen Harris, KJ Henry, Andre Jones Jr., Joshua Pryor. And then they also signed, the Commanders did, outside linebacker Michael Walker. What's interesting about him is he is the only player on the roster currently listed as an outside linebacker, not listed as a defensive end, not listed as just a straight up linebacker. So he's a little bit of an anomaly. We're going to take a look at him a little bit as well here. But Dorrance Armstrong coming in on a 3-year, $33 million deal. 2 void years on there, along with the bonuses, and give him a $4.89 million cap hit this year. The rest of the new additions, the 2 new guys, Clelin Ferrel, Dante Fowler Jr., both of them are on 1-year deals. Cleland's is worth $3.75 against the cap, $3.75 million against the cap. Fowler's is worth $3.25 million against the cap. And then Efe is also on a 1-year deal worth $1.035 million against the cap. So given those additions and the return of Efe Obada, I look at the starters right now, most likely being Dorrance Armstrong, who came over from the Cowboys, and Clelin Ferrel, who came over for the 49ers. Clelin Ferrel, a first-round draft pick in 2019 by the Raiders. Didn't work out there, ends up with the San Francisco 49ers, and now, again, is with the Washington Commanders. Rotational guys, I think that you're going to have 2 rotational pieces, and those 2 players I view right now being Dante Fowler and most likely Efe Obada, at least entering training camp. I do believe younger guys like KJ Henry, Andre Jones Jr. will have opportunities to compete at training camp, and if they can show that they're a fit, show they can do what the team needs them to do, what the staff needs them to do, potentially overtake Efe in one of those positions, become a rotational guy. But when you look at the Dallas Cowboys history under Coach Quinn, under Coach Joe Witt Jr., who's now the defensive coordinator here in Washington, really it was about a 4-man job. That defensive end position wasn't a situation where you had 1 or 2 defensive ends playing 80-90% of the snaps. It was usually a situation where 2 defensive ends started the game, played 60, maybe 70% of the snaps, and then you had 2 other guys rotating in for 30-40%, give or take. And again, some games, obviously, there's more snaps. Some games, there's fewer snaps, all those things. But the bottom line is it really looked like it was kind of a group effort. There was a unit there. There was like 4 guys, but obviously you have your starters. So again, for me, the starters, I'm going to project right now to be Dorrance Armstrong and Cleveland Ferrel. That's who I expect to probably be the first two defensive ends on the field when we start training camp in July. And then Dante Fowler, F.A. Obata, I expect probably be the next two guys with KJ Henry, Andre Jones Jr., Joshua Pryor, Jalen Harris battling it out for reps behind them. What's interesting is typically you only take about 5, maybe 6 on the roster, on the active roster. 6 would be kind of a lot. I think maybe 5 is probably more your target. So if that's the case, you have Armstrong, Ferrel, Fowler, and Obata kind of holding on to spots. That means KJ Henry, Andre Jones Jr. may be battling out for that last spot, and then the loser of that spot may be ending up on the practice squad. But then you have Michael Walker, who, like I mentioned here in the beginning of this segment, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, which where he most recently played. He also played with the Atlanta Falcons, but most recently played with the Pittsburgh Steelers, was used much more as an off-ball linebacker. And not so much as he was not so much, in on the defensive line, but the Washington Commanders list him as an outside linebacker. And again, the interesting there is he's the only outside linebacker. Typically, you see teams identify outside linebackers when they're running a 3-4, right? An odd front defense. You got 3 down linemen, 1 down lineman, something like that. Sometimes 2 down linemen. And then you've got 4 stand-up linebackers or 2 off-ball linebackers in the middle, also known as middle linebackers or inside linebackers. And then your 2 outside linebackers who are almost exclusively standing up, if not exclusively standing up. So Michael Walker really, when you turn on the film, certainly kind of looks like he fits the mold more of an off-ball linebacker than he does an outside linebacker or a defensive end, certainly. So it's going to be real interesting. He's kind of a wild card in this whole situation. It's going to be real interesting to see once we get to training camp, once we get to some of these mini camps, to kind of see where he's lining up. But at the end of the day, we had some guys dive into film too, so our film for. So we went ahead and did that again. Insiders, you're going to be receiving those film study files. Unfortunately, again, just to reiterate, every day, as you've heard me say this plenty of times, but because of licensing and the fact that the Locked On Podcast Network does not have the license with the NFL, as most YouTube pages, most podcasts don't have the licensing, can't show you the film. And honestly, this is an audio podcast first. So if you're listening, even if I did show you the film, you're not going to be able to watch it anyway. So I'm going to tell you what I saw in the film, what kind of traits I saw from these new guys joining the roster, and then we'll blend that into how I think these new additions impact the Washington Commanders 2024 NFL draft strategy. All of that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing that you would do if you had an extra hour in your day? Perhaps you'd go for a run, take a walk, take a nap, read a book, hang out with friends, hang out with family. Who knows? Whatever it is, the bottom line is a lot of us spend our lives wishing that we had more time. But the question is, what would that time be for? If you had unlimited time, how would you go about using it? Well, the best way for you to squeeze whatever that special thing you're looking to do into your schedule is, it's to know what's important to you, why it's important to you, and then, of course, find the skills to make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you and help you find ways to do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, or if you need to find ways to prioritize what's important, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You start off with a brief questionnaire. It literally takes you almost no time at all. Then you get matched with a licensed therapist. And once you start, you can switch therapists at any time. No questions asked, no extra additional charges, none of the hassle. Learn how to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Continuing now in today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Thanks for coming through. Make sure you come back tomorrow. We got Mailbag Wednesday dropping. So if you've got questions, insiders, text me. You know how to do it. Text me your questions. If you're not an insider and you still want to ask questions, just drop them in the YouTube comment section, and I will get to as many of those as I can. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your television all day long and find yourself having to turn the volume down when the shouting begins? Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinion, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Continuing now our conversation about the new defensive ends joining the Washington Commanders. We talked about who they are, what they're making, who I see as the depth chart leaders heading into this portion of the offseason. And again, once we get to training camp and all that stuff. So let's break down really what we saw from these guys that made me think that's how the depth chart is going to work. And we're going to start with Dorrance Armstrong. I think right now, if you put me into a corner and say, identify these defensive ends, the best one first, which one of these guys is the best guy as it stands today, I think I would go defensive end Dorrance Armstrong, who was coming over from the Dallas Cowboys, played mostly right defensive end for the Dallas Cowboys in 2023. And for this, we studied the Dallas Cowboys week 1 game against the New York Giants in New York, week 4 against New England, and then week 12 against the Washington Commanders. And again, any of these new guys, if they play the Washington Commanders, I'm going to turn on that Washington Commanders tape. I feel like it gives me a better advantage to be able to fully, articulate and fully understand who it is that they are and what it is that they can do when I'm looking at them going up against a guy like, say, Charles Leno or Sam Cosmi, for example, which is what I got to watch with Dorrance Armstrong. So I'm always going to include Washington there, but I always tend to look at some other games as well. Divisional games are always important as well. So you like to see a lot of those things. So when I turn on Dorrance Armstrong's tape, what makes me believe that he's the best defensive end on this roster right now? When I look at the pass rushes, right, I always split this up between pass rush and run plays. Good motor. This is a guy who's not going to give up on a play. Look, there are going to be times where a defensive end is designed to. It's kind of designed that there's pressure coming one way, or hey, if the line pushes this way or the quarterback rolls this way, we want you to stay at home, play smart, play that kind of passive defense. There's going to be moments for that, but for the most part, you want these guys attacking. You want your defensive ends trying to find ways to get upfield. And with Dorrance Armstrong, you very rarely, if ever, see him give up on a play without it being some sort of a designed or, hey, I think I'm sniffing out a screen here, so I'm going to kind of play soft so that I can react to that, which is great. And truth be told, all of you understand this. Not something we saw from the defensive ends in Washington all the time over the last few years. Very versatile player. I saw him line up, again, mostly as the right defensive end, but you also see him line up on the left side. And you see him line up in the middle. You see him line up over the center in the A gaps and the B gaps as 1 tech, 2 tech, 3 tech, all the way out to 9 tech. Or 9 tech, wide 9. Plays all over the defensive line for Dan Quinn in Dallas. And so you expect him to be able to do that for Joe Witt here in Washington. A physical team-focused player. There are multiple times, again, insiders, you're going to get this film sent to you on a private link. If you watch that, you're going to see he's a very physical, team-focused player. There's one play specifically that I outlined for the insiders that it was a screenplay that the Washington Commanders executed against the Dallas Cowboys. He's actually falling off into coverage, interestingly enough. Again, talking about that versatility. And when the play develops, you get 4 Washington Commanders offensive linemen, well, 3 linemen and a tight end out in front of running back Antonio Gibson. And in the screen, there's 2 Dallas Cowboys defenders. But because of the way those defenders attack the screen blocking, and specifically because Dorrance Armstrong takes up 2 of those blockers by himself, literally runs into the fray and just gives up his body and says, I'm going to swallow 2 blockers at once. The Washington Commanders looked like they had a setup for maybe a 12, 15-yard screen game for Antonio Gibson. Ends up only being about 8 yards, which 8 yards is still a decent gain, certainly. But because of the sacrifice, because of the physical play from Dorrance Armstrong helping the Dallas Cowboys contain that screen to a more modest gain. And run defense, he's got good gap discipline, really knows how to control his blocker, really knows how to make sure that his gap is taken care of, shows a lot of good ability to shed blocks and make tackles when the opportunities arise. And even when he's double teamed, he's not giving up a lot of real estate. So it looks like he's got a fairly solid anchor, but also the ability to disengage from blockers and make plays for his defense. So just a lot of good things to see from Dorrance Armstrong's tape. The Dallas Cowboys fans and social media and all that stuff was not happy when they saw him leaving for Washington. And when you turn on the tape and watch him play, you can certainly see why. Then we move on to defensive end Clelin Ferrell. Again, for me, if I have to identify the starting defensive ends for this defense right now, Clelin Ferrell would be the other one. And I wouldn't say he's a polar opposite from Dorrance Armstrong, but certainly not the same type of player, much more of a power-focused player. He played mostly right end for the San Francisco 49ers last year. So that's going to be interesting. 2 guys who played mostly on the right side. I think Clelin probably shifts over more to the left side. In this defense, I watched week 8 versus Cincinnati, week 6 at the Cleveland Browns, and week 17 at the Washington Commanders. And like I said, when you turn on the pass rush film, certainly a guy who likes to use power. Not really a speed to power guy, just straight up power. I kind of showed some clips of dudes just sticking the arm straight out there, trying to use that length, use that leverage, and really stick it to Charles Leno and kind of drive him where he wants him to go. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work as well. But he looks a little stiff and uncomfortable trying to win with finesse or with speed. I showed a clip against Curtis Samuel. The Curtis Samuel is lined up kind of like an inline tight end, which is a little bit weird. But Cleveland Ferrel puts a swim move on Curtis Samuel, and it just looks really odd. Not just because Curtis Samuel is so much smaller than Cleveland Ferrel, but because Cleveland just does not look comfortable using those types of finesse or speed type moves, trying to get through the offensive line. But he does have play endurance. You know what I mean? This is a guy. You look at Dorrance Armstrong's tape, and you never see him give up on a snap or on a rep. Cleveland Ferrel is the same way. I showed 2 sacks, one against Cincinnati. I think the other one was against Cleveland, one was against Washington. Sorry, I think the other one was against Cincinnati. And because of his perseverance and his willingness to play to and through the whistle, the 49ers end up getting sacks out of those plays. One directly attributed to Ferrel. The other one, I don't know what he got credited for, but he should have gotten credited, at least half a sack for it. If he didn't, it'd be a travesty. In run defense, again, powerful, right? Edge setter. He's a good guy. He can hold up the point of attack, especially if a team is running wide to his side. He's going to be able to hold up his side of things. He's not going to get pushed down the line, pushed off the line. He's going to be able to do that and make a good play. Not a quick disengager. With Dorrance Armstrong, you were able to see him engage with a blocker, shed that block, make a play if he needed to. Again, Cleveland Ferrel, much more of a guy who's going to try to take his blocker and put his blocker in the way of the run, try to figure out where we're going. Like, if you're trying to push me out of the B gap, because that's where you want to run, I'm going to try to keep my blocker in that B gap and jam that thing up. Same thing. If you're trying to push me out of the C gap, I'm going to try to stick in the C gap and jam that thing up. And he's actually pretty good at it. So I think you're going to see a little bit more power from Cleveland Ferrel. You're going to see more of a speed power blend from a guy like Dorrance Armstrong. And then with Dante Fowler, I think you more have the speed type of guy, not a whole lot of power. Last played for the Dallas Cowboys, played left end mostly in 2023 for Dallas. Again, for them, for Dante, I watched week 18 at Washington, week 4 against New England, and week 17 against the Detroit Lions. Pass rusher, not as quick as Dorrance Armstrong. Right off the bat, you kind of notice that there's actually clips in both files at the very first rep of Dorrance Armstrong, the very first rep of Dante Fowler. They both try to set up a very similar move against Charles Leno, and you can just see side-by-side comparison. Dante Fowler just simply not as quick, not as fast as Dorrance Armstrong, but certainly not, he's not a bus in the mud. He's certainly got enough speed, loves to use speed to power. So where Cleveland Ferrel is just kind of raw power, stick my arm out, trying to drive you where I want to. Dante Fowler is much more of a speed to power type of guy. Good enough bend to push the quarterback up in the pocket. Saw that on multiple reps as well. Run defense notes, not as large of a sample size, but you do see really nice bursts coming off the line when he has the opportunity. There's a really good play he made against the Detroit Lions where he comes off the line completely clean, avoids a pulling tight end who's trying to block him, and puts a nice hit on Lions running back David Montgomery. Showing burst off the line, agility to get around the blocker, and then the ability to finish in the backfield by bringing down a pretty tough running back in David Montgomery. And finally, again, Michael Walker. We've already talked about it. I had to turn on the tape. Insiders, I didn't do a tape study for him because honestly, I did not see anything or a lot of reps that really fit what I think maybe the Washington Commanders are going to do. And maybe I'm reading too much in this outside linebacker tag. But if they're trying to use him as an edge defender, just not a lot of film to go off of from his time with the Steelers to really kind of say this is where I think he's going to fit. So Michael Walker is a guy to kind of watch there. It's going to be interesting to see how they use him, where they're putting him, and then whether or not he's able to make an impact there to make the roster. I tried watching, week 13 against Arizona, 16 against Cincinnati, 17 against Seattle. And again, just a lot of stuff that you expect Bobby Wagner, Frankie Louvu, Jamin Davis to be doing, not a guy like Michael Walker. So it'll be really interesting, again, to see what they do there. But what does it all mean for the depth chart? I already told you I think the starters are, but where could the Washington Commanders potentially target an edge rusher? I don't think it's now a primary target like it was at the beginning of the offseason before all these signings were made. But I still think there's a chance the Washington Commanders could spend a top 40 pick, certainly top 100 pick on the position. We'll talk about some of those targets coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time, and Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets to your favorite baseball games even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Their last-minute deals save up to 60%. Their flash deals give you exclusive in-app opportunities. Zone deals save you even more when you pick the area and they pick the seat. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Create your account and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Wrapping up our look at the Washington Commanders defensive end situation by looking at some NFL draft targets I think they could target in this year's NFL draft. Makes sense with why they're called NFL draft targets. We looked at the newcomers. We looked at the one guy that they re-signed. We looked at a reshaping of the depth chart, told you why I think these players fit and where they do. And now we're looking towards the NFL draft. And again, obviously, I think the first pick the Washington Commanders make will not be an edge rusher. It will be a quarterback, whether it's at number 2, number 11, whatever it is. I certainly think you're going to talk about a quarterback at that position. Your next pick, I think, is most likely going to be an offensive tackle, especially if there's a trade up into the first round. A lot of us are talking about the Washington Commanders potentially packaging some of these picks they have. They've got 5 day 2 picks right now, 2 in the second round, 3 in the third round, and certainly a possibility of packaging some of those picks, maybe even a future pick if you want to get crazy with it, and moving back up into the back end of the first round so you can grab an offensive tackle. I don't think you're making a trade like that to get an edge rusher, which means the earliest you're likely to see an edge rusher go to the Washington Commanders will come on day 2, either at pick number 36 or possibly pick number 40. Now, if the Washington Commanders keep one of those 2 picks, so if you're not trading 36 and 40 to get back in the first round, and you do get back in the first round, then I think whatever that other pick is, 36 or 40, certainly could be an edge rusher. Could also be a cornerback, could be a linebacker. I don't think it's going to be a linebacker. Could be a tight end if they see a guy that they like enough there. But if they look for an edge, I think 2 guys that'll certainly be there at 36 they could consider. Marshawn Nealon out of Western Michigan. He's a former tight end, so he's got that kind of athleticism and range on the field and just kind of awareness of how to move on the field. He's aggressive. He's the first guy to make contact when you watch him play, and he's better when he's standing up. When you watch the Dallas Cowboys tape, when you watch guys like Dorrance Armstrong, those guys have a lot of opportunities to play standing up. They're certainly hand in the dirt a good amount of time as well, but they have the opportunity to play standing up. So seeing a guy like Marshawn Nealon, who maybe needs to stand up more often than not, does not necessarily take him off the board. Another second round potential guy, maybe third round guy, depending on how the board falls, Adisa Isaac out of Penn State. He's more of a power type of edge, but he's got a really good motor. Again, football IQ is apparent when you watch him play. He's quick off the line to the snap of the ball. More of an outside linebacker type than he is a defensive end. But again, this Washington Commanders defense is not going to be kind of contained into your traditional Madden-esque definitions, I don't believe. So I don't think that'll necessarily be a problem. Adisa Isaac, honestly, is probably my favorite on this list, just because I really like watching him. I really like what we've seen from him. I do plan on doing a full tape study on him later on down the line as we get closer to the NFL draft here. We're within 3 weeks of that happening. Austin Booker out of Kansas, another day 2 type of guy. I think he's underrated a little bit because of his lack of experience and play time in Kansas, but he's an explosive athlete, shows a really good, toolkit as a pass rusher, has a lot of tricks up his sleeve, and he's good at creating separation for blockers. And I think that's really big when you're a guy who's going to try to make moves on someone. If you're up tight and you're up in their chest and they got their arms around you and stuff like that, it's really hard to kind of manipulate them. But if you can keep that distance, which Austin Booker does pretty well, then it kind of gives you those opportunities. Moving into day 3, Chris Braswell of Alabama is a guy who, depending on which mock draft simulator you're using, depending on which mock draft you're reading, he's kind of all over the board. And I put him here in day 3 just because the last mock draft that I really kind of leaned on was that of Chad Reuter out of NFL.com. He had him in as a day 3 guy. Lance Zierlein of NFL.com's grading of him has him kind of in that day 2, day 3 fringe area as well. So look, he could go a little bit sooner, obviously. But either way, I think he's going to be underrated. If he does go, in day 3 or late day 2, I think it's going to be because of how long it took him to get on the field at Alabama. And I don't necessarily think that's fair because Alabama, as Commanders fans know more than a lot of other NFL teams, they churn out NFL talent quite a bit. So Chris Braswell maybe being punished a little bit in the sense that evaluators are going to be a little bit more conservative given the fact that they haven't been able to see a lot of them. But when you do see him, he's not great setting the edge, so not a great, huge, he's not going to be able to kind of be that bookend all the time. He is going to be susceptible getting pushed out, but he's got good burst off the line of scrimmage at the snap of the ball. And again, he displays a lot of tools as a pass rusher. And then there's Jalix Hunt, Houston Christian product. Day 3 guy, again, not an anchor, definitely a speed rusher, former safety, kind of shows that type of athleticism, that type of flash and speed. So certainly if you want him to be an every down type of guy, he's going to need some development, but he's intriguing because he could be a special teams contributor and he could be a special pass rush, specialist pass rush package, maybe like a NASCAR package. If you have one of those, you get in there, get him isolated on a guy that he may be surprised with some of that speed. And you never know, maybe he can make some plays for you. So he's a guy I certainly think is worth watching in Day 3, 5th round, things like that. That's kind of where teams start to take flyers on, like, you do this really, really well. We'll see if we can train you to do this other stuff while we take advantage of what you do really well already. So again, Jalix Hunt, Chris Braswell, Austin Booker, Adisa Isaac, Marshawn Nealon, some guys to look for in the NFL draft. Again, I don't think the Washington Commanders have to spend a top 100 pick, top 40 pick, top 78 pick on the position, but I think they certainly could and maybe even should look at bringing some younger talent into that group as we move forward. So that was our look at the defensive end group. We looked at the new guys, restacked the depth chart, went over some things I saw on tape when I watched the new guys, and then identified some NFL draft targets. Coming up tomorrow, we've got a mailbag episode. And you know what? We're getting close to the draft. So if you got a guy you specifically want me to watch, someone maybe we haven't talked about a lot, someone that you think maybe is a sleeper, let me know, and we'll see if we can fit that in. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, just throw them in the YouTube comment section, or insiders, text me directly. If you're not an insider and you want to get in on that fun, go to joinsubtext.com/lockedoncommanders. We've added quite a few in the last couple of weeks. I appreciate all of you, and I hope you're enjoying that access. Don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day, and everydayers. Thank you for coming through every day like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.